Hello, and welcome to the NOTstalgia podcast.
A podcast where we discuss the retelling or continuation of pop culture favorites as seen through a queer and feminist lens.
My name is Eric Lefebvre.
And my name is Jessica Tercero.
And this week, we watched Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Willy Wonka
and the Chocolate Factory.
Yes, the canonic chocolatier love story. No, I'm just kidding. I don't think I've seen Charlie and the Chocolate Factory since it came out in theaters. Like, I remember distinctly going to see that in theaters, but I have not seen it since.
First of all, I failed my perception when I was, like, relating to these movies because, like, I was like, oh, yeah, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, right? And, like, for some reason, it was always just Willy Wonka and the remake of Willy Wonka, which it is, but, like, I didn't like the title. Like, I never cared about the title. So, like, this time, like, oh, my God. Like, all right, fine. So, no, I don't think I saw it in theaters, but I remember seeing it, and I was just appalled at everything we'll talk about. But the original, I watched, obviously, as a kid, but I'd seen it a couple times as an adult, and just because it's pretty and gorgeous and fun, and but it has been a hot minute since I watched it, and watched it critically at that.
Oh, for sure.
But, like, it's so gorgeous. Like, it's just so... I want to go to the chocolate room and just, like, have, like, the cutest photo shoot. That's all I want. It's
so cute. I also did not realize how much that first one, the Gene Wilder one, resonated with me as a kid. Or, like, really how many times I'd seen it, because I'm like, oh yeah, well, I've seen that as a kid. And then watching it, I remembered, like, every moment, like even the nuance of that, like, bed dance. And, like, there were a couple times, like, they would sing a certain way, or, like, he would say a certain phrase, and, like, there was a look, and I remembered all of them so clearly and distinctly that I was like, I must have seen this movie a million times. Like, how do I know it this well? That's so strange. And a couple times too that, like, a scene would be happening, and all of a sudden I'm, like, kind of tearing up. It's like, it's kind of out of context, but, like, it almost felt like, oh, like, my brain's reconnecting with this movie in that really, really specific and poignant nostalgic way, where it's like now being like, oh, remember when you felt like this when you were, like, 6? Do you remember that feeling? And that's what was kind of making me tear up. And I was like, oh my God, I haven't really experienced something like that in a long time.
Or
at least not with something that's, like, nostalgic like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that makes sense because, like, I also didn't realize how well I knew this movie, right? Like,
right? Yeah.
Because it's just like, oh, it was like, it was one of those things where it was just kind of always on. It was always on TV, I feel like.
Yeah.
And then when I was doing, like, research into the film, when it came out in theaters, it was a flop. Like, it made, I want to say, it cost $10 million to make and only made 3, I think.
Whoa.
Or something like that, right? So it was, like, a big-ass flop, but it wasn't until, like, the 90s when it started, like, because TV got a hold of it and then just played it all the fucking time, right? Yeah. Where 90s babies were really the ones that kind of have that love and nostalgia for it that wasn't really there when it first came out. It didn't become iconic until then, really.
Also, iconic enough for the social culture that it, like, demanded a remake that did fairly well, right? Like, because it's not like, I mean, if it had still bombed and there wasn't a sort of renaissance for it in popular culture, it wouldn't have been remade, I'm assuming. I mean, granted, who knows? Tim Burton might have done it, but at the same time, like, that is so funny that the 90s was its sort of renaissance, because it was, like, I mean, that is kind of like 20 years later.
There's a couple of movies that did that too, like 2001 and stuff like that, right? Which we already covered. But about Tim Burton, I think Danny mentioned this, but this was the film that Tim Burton always wanted to make. Like,
really?
Yeah, like, this was his fucking movie he wanted to make. And Roald Dahl...
and that's how he did it?
We're going to talk. We're going to have words. I have opinions. But,
yeah, same.
The movie he always wanted to make, so he's like, he fucking pushed really hard for it. And I guess, like, Roald Dahl hated the original, fucking hated it, even though he wrote a lot of the screenplay, right?
He's credited as screenplay by
Yeah.
in the original. Yeah.
Yeah, so he super, super, super didn't like it, and was really not happy with the finished product. He hated a lot of the things that they changed from his original story, which they did change a lot, and I think a lot of what they changed was good, but he was not very happy about it. So he always wanted a remake, right? And then it's like, when you get down into like the history of this movie, like, or like the facts surrounding it and how like the original was made, it's like the reason it's called Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is because Quaker sponsored the whole movie and they wanted to use the name Willy Wonka on candy bars. So like they changed the whole name because of that. Also, part of the reason why it's called Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is also because of the civil rights movement. Because in the book, the Oompa Loompas were, as we talked about in the Witches episode, pygmies from Africa, end quote. But the producers felt like that was not a great idea to have a white man, bring to slavery and all of this. Like in the book, it says like they were shipped to England in large packing cases with holes in them. Like that's a direct quote from the original source piece, right? And so the 1970s, the NAACP and a bunch of other like civil rights groups criticized them, and they're like, yo, this is racist, right? Which it absolutely was. So like Dahl had to like rewrite his work, and it was a whole thing. But like, yeah, so we can thank the civil rights movement and marketing and Quaker for this being Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, not Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
So I love the fact that the changing of the name was for marketing purposes and for sale of candy, because I will say there was a bit of a cognitive disconnect as a kid seeing Willy Wonka candy, branded candy in stores, because in my head I'm like, Willy Wonka's not real.
Yeah.
So seeing this, I'm like, wait, is this fucking real?
Yeah.
Like a 6-year-old just being like, wait. That's based on a real person. But I mean, obviously, it's so the sort of lore behind it in my child years, not recognizing. I mean, I just love it. I think that's lovely. Yeah,
Isn't
and
that
also,
great?
I mean,
think that's also such like a cool because there's obviously this whole thing is like a commentary on capitalism and stuff, but like fucking so meta in that way, you know. So like I feel like when you're looking at the film through that lens, and then knowing that this was the intent behind the entire fucking movie, like, wow.
I mean, I also just think it's good. Like the fact that Roald Dahl didn't like it, I think that's a stamp of approval of like, yeah, this is better. This is good. If he doesn't like it, I'm happy. Like, because he's just, I mean, as we said in the Witches episode, a resounding piece of shit, an anti-Semitic asshole who is obviously a racist bigot. Like he's just trash. You know what I mean? So
if y'all don't believe us, like NPR really just did a piece on this. Like that's how in the know this is. So like, just Google it. Also, honestly,
with the Witches having just come out, didn't Dahl's family just like publicly and formally apologize on his behalf? Posthumously, which I think, I mean, at the same time, like fuck him, and I'm happy he's gone. But I don't know. It seems. It's so weird to me, and it's not weird because it's like white supremacist systemic patriarchy, but like a lot of these filmmakers who like they stick to the source material, like with the Witches, how like that ending was like kind of like an anti-Semitic witch hunt motif bullshit, and it's like, well, that's based on the original story. I'm like, yeah, but the storyteller was a Nazi, so like if you're gonna remake the story, maybe leave out the the sort of Nazi shit and keep in whatever else, or just don't make his shit into these huge don't elaborate on these huge IPs and give him more money. How about like you can write original stories? I don't know. It's a whole thing. But,
yeah, well, and like a big reason why Dahl hated the 1970s film is because it wasn't as dark, and it was like Wonka wasn't as troubled, and which like again, talking about remakes of Roald Dahl's stories, right? Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, 2005 by Tim Burton, is much closer to the source material. So it's just like, it's so messy and it's gross.
Yeah.
And also Gene Wilder hated that. There's a quote where he's just like, I think it's an insult to do that with Johnny Depp, who I think is a good actor, but I don't care for that director, and he's a talented man, but I don't care for him doing stuff like he did. End
wow.
Quote. End quote. That is fucking quoted.
I will say, I mean, Gene Wilder's performance is fantastic. Johnny Depp, all of those choices, I want to tear that one up a lot. Let's just jump into the first one. Do you want to?
Yes, let's do it. Okay.
Okay, cool. In some dreary town at some dreary time, a young, optimistic paper boy named Charlie Bucket dreams of better days for him and his family. In said town, local, mysterious, and world-famous chocolatier Willy Wonka has announced a golden ticket sweepstakes with a lifetime supply of chocolate and a super-secret grand prize for one lucky kid. Amongst a group of affluent kids from all over the world, Charlie is among the winners. Between Augustus Gloop, Veruca Salt, Violet Beauregard, Mike TV, and Charlie, who will be the mysterious prize recipient?
As the group tours through the wild world of Willy Wonka, the children begin falling victim to self-imposed accidents. Augustus gets sucked up a pipe, Violet becomes a blueberry, Veruca gets thrown in the trash, and Mike shrinks himself into a pocket-sized version of himself. In the end, Charlie's kind heart and selflessness end up earning him the entire Wonka estate, and he and his family are no longer poor. Hooray!
Hooray! I have a couple things to say about this, but I want to, off the bat, say I really still love Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I think Gene Wilder is perfect in this. I think, like, Willy Wonka as a character is such an asshole, and I love, like, the way that he treats these asshole kids the whole time. It'll be like, well, I know this. He's like, no, you don't. Like, one of the parents is like, what is this, Wonka? Some kind of fun house? He's like, why are you having fun?
Yeah.
Like,
the way that he played, like, Gene Wilder is just such a fucking gem in this.
Like, oh my God, the suspense is terrible. I hope it'll last. Like, what else is there? Oh, the kid, Mike TV, is like, screams at him like, how did you make them? He's like, what? I'm a trifle deaf in this ear. Speak louder next time. It's just like all of this like backhanded shitty. It's a great. He's so fucking funny in this movie.
All questions must be submitted in writing. Like,
yeah.
Just like every turn, every question, every time he's just like, oh no, don't stop. Like he knows this is going to happen, and he's just like, I hate everything. I hate all of this.
I'm obsessed with him in this movie. I
love this movie. I love everything. I was also getting a little bit teary watching it, just like, like there's just so much magic in it, and like the way that every scene is stylized, and like the look of Wilder himself in this film,
iconic.
Just so good and so incredible. And I never realized too how much they make you wait to get to the chocolate factory, right?
Like 40 minutes.
You don't see Gene Wilder until like 40 minutes in, right? That's when you get to the chocolate factory. And it's just like this huge buildup that pays off in such a lovely and like mystical and magical and mysterious but dangerous like sort of way, like, and it really is just such a well-paced and just such a good film.
It's a really well-told story, and this one is particularly because I like the way that the story as we get to the factory, we're being introduced to these different characters and their guardians, or like these different families, right, as juxtaposed by our hero, who is Charlie. Each one is particularly bad in their own unique way, and this movie does a really good job at being like, yeah, these people are assholes. Like, it's either the kid is misinformed and their parents suck, or the kid's an asshole and their parents are complicit, or like what have you. There's like, they really paint them so villainously and like concisely, which I appreciate, because then when we get to the chocolate factory, the only kind-hearted ones are really Willy Wonka and then Charlie and his grandpa. There's a really nice divide of like what is considered good and bad. Not to say again that like the binary has to be good, because shit's nuanced, but in a pretty simple like kind of storybook story with a very clear and concise like happily ever after moment. I do like that this movie does a very good job at dictating to us, the audience, being like, they're bad, they're good, they're bad, they're good. remember that, so that when they disappear, it's like, oh, I feel good about this. I feel fine. Whereas like the Johnny Depp one, I mean, well, I want to get into like the fat jokes of it, which that was a whole deal, but it's too nuanced where it's like, well, they're supposed to be good, but they're also like complicit in the fat shaming of this child, or you know what I mean? Like it was too murky and not specific enough to be like, I know what's going on here. Whereas this one was a lot more structured.
I feel like Willy, like this one, was nuanced in the right ways. You know, you could see the children and how they mirrored their parents, and you know, they inherited the terrible behaviors from their parents and were also enabled by them, right? Like cyclical behavior patterns, I guess.
Yeah.
But then in the next one, it's just kind of like the gritty reboot where, again, in place of nuance, they just put noise, right? Like that whole thing. So one of the things I really like about Willy Wonka is I don't think that he's a good guy. I think he's, so you're talking about binaries, and I agree. I think that, you know, like Charlie is very representative of pure, good-hearted, you know, 100% good, right? All of the kids are bad, 100% bad, right?
Yeah.
But then there's Willy Wonka, where you know he wants to do good, maybe, or you want to see him as that person, but he is actually not that person. And I like that. And I like...
That's true, yeah.
He's incredibly delusional, egotistical, selfish. He considers himself like the provider of dreams for all of these people and is capitalizing on all of that while still being a white savior, right? And, you know, he devised all of these traps supposedly to get these children hurt, right? He knew like there were just enough seats in the boat when they got in the boat, the Chocolate River boat thing, right?
Yeah.
So like all of these things are very intentional, and he's so meticulous in the way that he does things. Even the placing of the golden tickets, right? Slugworth, or quote unquote Slugworth, was within earshot every single time one of those tickets was found. So he planted those where he knew where they were going to be, and then set up this test of loyalty to prove that they're loyal, because he wants to control the narrative in every way possible. That's why he closes his factory. That's why he does all of this, right? And he hates being questioned or challenged. So, of course, he wants to find a child to impress upon them everything that he wants. You know, like, again, we see this as, like, you know, he is good, he is all of this stuff, when really he's just an incredible capitalist. And, you know, there's just, like, he hides behind the goodness that his brand has created. You know, like, in the same way, like, we've talked about it before, but Disney, right? Like, Disney is a brand. You associate Walt Disney with good things, not, you know, most people don't know that he was a misogynist and, like, you know, anti-Semitic.
Going to what you just said previously about, like, the whole impressionability of children and, like, maintaining, like, a stronghold over his image. Like, I obviously didn't notice this as a kid, but in the end, like, the supposedly happily ever after moment is when he's talking to Charlie, and Charlie's like, why didn't you just pick an adult? He's like, no, I had to pick a kid because they are more impressionable. If I picked an adult, they would have just done whatever they want. But you will listen to me. You'll do whatever I say, Charlie. And that's why I pick you. You're the one, because you're a kid and I can easily manipulate you and I can control you. And that's why you're the winner. And you're like, wait. And then it's like elevator in the sky, boo-doo-doo-doo-doo, credits. And you're like, whoa, wait, that's like the last line of the movie? That's insidious. That's pretty fucking wild. I hadn't noticed that at all.
You look at him, right? And, like, you know, there's the shot where he's, like, going to, like, his office at the end of the tour, and he's pissed. And on the door, there's, like, vice president, chairman of the board, president, superintendent, you know, like, all of these titles that he only has himself because he doesn't trust anybody else, which is why he uses slave labor.
Which, I mean, that's a whole nother, like, as an industrial capitalist, which is who he is, obviously he's going to have some colonizer tendencies. So this whole concept, this notion that, like, he's gone and got these people from this place that they didn't want to be, it's like, well, that's not true. You took people from their homeland and brought them here to work for you for free. Slavery. You're just doing slavery now. Like, that's all you're doing. Slavery for the sake of profit, to make sure that you run this, and you're such an egomaniacal narcissist that you have to control everything, and that includes people.
And also their how they perceive the world, right? Because it's never the Oompa Loompas always say what Wonka is thinking that he can't say himself, right? So in every song, they're talking about, like they're like, "Yo, you're too fat. You're too greedy. Your chewing gum is repulsive and wrong, like a cow." And you're like, wait, what? And then what do they say? Like, mom and dad are to blame for spoiled kids. Don't watch TV, blah, blah, blah. You should read a book. Yeah. And I was like, okay, boober. But then also, like, when you look at it, too, because, like, they're singing about, like, if you don't want anything and, you just accept your place, like, you could just be happy. It's fine, right?
Yeah.
Which is wild because you never see them happy or smile or anything. So, like, they're trying to tell other people, like, just don't, like, don't be an asshole and just accept everything and you'll be fine and everything's fine. And meanwhile, like, Wonka's whole brand is anything you want to do, you can do it. There's nothing to it, right?
Yeah.
Which is, like, and there's, like, the whole song at the beginning, which is, like, candy makes the world taste good. It's this whole thing where, like, the candy itself is also, like, really meta thing for how branding works and how it makes you feel good about yourself, right?
Well, it's also this level of like sold joy, bought and sold joy, artificial joy. It's something that's like, yes, it's this kind of momentary and instantaneous thing, but at the end of the day, it's a product that's been sold to you. So it's like what you were saying about the phrase of like anything you want to do it. There's nothing to it. Is really fucking gross. Just when it comes to like what that's always something to some degree that people of privilege say. Like,
I was gonna say, yeah.
If you want to do something, just do it. It's like that's not how it works for everybody. That's that's not realistic. And especially looking at him as like literally somebody who stole people from their land to work for him for free and has all of these people do all of these things for him, I'm assuming for free, and takes credit for all of these things.
And is being an asshole to all of these kids, right? He's like, do whatever you want, but don't do that, right? So like going back to controlling the narrative. So like, what the fuck are you trying to say?
Well, there's also a level of like, now that we're talking about it, part of the reason he hates these kids is because he can't control them. Charlie's the only one who will listen and will do whatever he says. I mean, granted, it's not these kids' fault that they're assholes. These parents are pieces of shit. Like, these parents are trash. I will fully say, Veruca Salt is one of my favorite characters.
Love
She's
so much.
like, she's such an asshole, and she's so, like, particularly stringent, and, like, I'm obsessed with her. I think she's so
her whole
cool.
dance scene. Just like
so
lovely.
I want the world. I want the whole. Give it to me. Ba, 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 ba. And I'm like, well, on top of it being just like pure 70s gold, her as a character, I love her. So I think she's so emblematic of the like loud woman trope of it like being sort of bad. But I mean, granted, in this world, it's sort of like the nastiness of children that they're trying to do, and again in a storybook way. I know it's like trying to be very like specific and fairy tale, but it's obviously the parents' fault that they're trash. But her as a character, obsessed. I am obsessed with how direct and like obviously she sucks. Like I'm not trying to be like, oh, she's so great and we love her. No, I think she's like tragic, but I still fucking think she's so cool. Like even in the remake, she's cool.
She's also just so confident, right? And that's something
She's super confident, yeah.
That's something we don't see that as much, or especially like a young girl embodying this much fucking confidence. And like, she's totally a girl boss, right? She's like, she is a little girl boss. But that's also another thing where it's like, you're right, that is playing into that trope of women's ambition, when if not checked, it's going to be a problem. But yeah, I love her character.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it just also has to do with like that performance too, because she did so good in that. All
Obsessed.
of the children were like the personified children versions of the 7 deadly sins, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Augustus Gloop is gluttony, right? Veruca is greed. And then Violet is pride, because she's like the show off. And then Mike TV is a shinny millennial, like 7 deadly sins. We got it. Yeah. But the cast was just great for this, I think.
Yeah, I think I was hoping that there would be more of a structured narrative around like the class discussion. I mean, the only thing that I could really get into as far as like what was discussed class wise is this notion of like controlling poor people, especially in that like last line where it's like, oh, well, I can control you, like whatever. It's like these other people are either upper middle class or incredibly affluent, like richest rich kids in the world. And at the end of the day, he knows that he can control the poorest of the poor who has
Right.
literally nothing with the promise of anything, any glimpse of hope, any small thing.
Because
I
he
will be
has
able to.
nothing.
He has nothing.
He
And
has
so he'll be
nothing
able to
and nothing to lose.
control loyally these people if he knows for a fact he can give them any and everything, right? And so that's like fucked up. I mean, I do like that they depicted rich people as trash.
Oh yeah,
in this.
exactly.
I thought that was fantastic. Like the dad, like Veruca's dad, who's like just gonna buy her whatever. In the factory, like all of his workers who work at this nut factory, just having them open boxes and boxes of chocolate. Like that's what they're doing, and it's like whoever finds it, I'm giving them $1 raise. Like okay, like that's so toxic and gross, and like I like that they were depicted as disgusting.
Also interesting that because like, he has no control over his daughter or probably presumably his wife, right? Like they kind of run the show. But all
Yeah.
of his employees are female, so he can assert his dominance over femininity in some way to make him feel better and more masculine, and then
Yeah.
the woman finds the ticket and he's like, I found the ticket, I found this, right? So taking credit for something that women have done for him.
Oh yeah.
So
I mean, it's patriarchal dominance on like the surface there, but then juxtaposing that with like his daughter who is so confident, and it's really the confidence that kind of is top tier as far as like any sort of structural confidence hierarchy. Whereas like she says she wants it, he'll do whatever. He tells them to do it, they do whatever. Like juxtaposing that, it's cool. Like the dynamic's cool. The family dynamic was sick. I like. Well, I also didn't like this. I kind of liked it, but didn't like it. Charlie's mom, she's doing so much for all of these people. For his grandparents on the dad's side who isn't there, and her parents all there. She's making it work best she can. And same with Charlie. Charlie's trying his best and like whatever money he has. And he's like, here, grandpa, take this and spend it on tobacco. And also, that's the grandpa who fucking is like, oh, we're going to the chocolate factory. Let me just get up now. Like, don't worry, y'all. I'm great. I can walk. And they're like, he can walk. And it's just like, hey, like.
You've been here for 20 years. What the fuck?
Yeah, why? Of course, why now? It's because of this. But he's just like, fuck. You've literally been making your grandson, who is like 6, work so he can pay for your fucking cigarettes. And not have enough food to eat apart from cabbage soup. And now that he like wins this amazing prize, you're like, oh, so me, I'm the one going too, right? Me?
Well, and he tries to take credit for it too. He's like,
Yeah.
I've got a golden ticket. I have a golden ticket. And like Charlie is always an afterthought in that song. Also,
Yeah.
Charlie cannot sing. That was
No.
atrocious. But
It was rough. But I love that song.
I love that song too. I did have like a moment because, like, I've been on a train fuck Grandpa Joe for a long time, right?
Oh,
because
yeah.
I'm like, fuck this lazy asshole. But then part of me too, and maybe it's just because of COVID, right? Part of me is like, was this supposed to be some sort of commentary on depression and how like debilitating that can be if you have clinical depression, you feel like you literally have nothing to live for, So I'm like, thoughtful portrayal of depression or lazy asshole. I don't know. You decide. Maybe it's just the COVID brain talking right now because guess what? It's been a whole year, everybody.
Yeah. Happy birthday to us. No, I mean, that's totally valid. 100%. And granted,
they do go into it more in the second one. So like, I think that is a little bit more valid there. And maybe that like, cause I haven't read the book obviously, but maybe that's discussed in the book and that's something that just kind of carried through. But yeah, so that kind of got me thinking. I was just like, fuck Grandpa Joe. But like, I also just need to ask myself that question.
I think that's a good question to ask for sure. Because you're right. I mean, the one moment that he does get up is this moment of goodness or optimism or hope in this vast sea of nothingness and the
constant
understanding
disappointment.
and constant disappointment and the understanding that like things might not and probably won't get better just based on history, based on this cycle.
Oh
So
my
as
gosh.
as much as he's trying to also instill hope in Charlie when the other grandpa is like, he has no fucking chance, like get that shit away from him. He has not a chance in hell, and grandpa is just like, hey, everyone has a chance, including Charlie. Let him hope, because I mean they as a collective sort of represent end of life hopelessness to some degree. So like the fact that he's trying to instill that sort of adds credence to this notion that like, yeah, he's fucking depressed. Like he's bummed out. It sucks. Life is hard and bad and rough most of the time for a lot of people.
Watching Charlie's mom too, like, because she's obviously fully accepted this, and she's doing she's doing her best. She's doing everything for all of these people, right? And so just like seeing all of this optimism in Charlie and seeing her have to balance that and try to like be like, hey, so this might not happen. Don't get your hopes too high. Don't like having to balance that just like broke my heart. And like just seeing Charlie just like when he goes to see her while she's like doing laundry, and he like tries to talk about, oh well, they found the last ticket, and he's just so sad. And like she literally can't do anything. She can't even, like, a loaf of bread is a feast for them. They have cabbage soup literally every day, and she like knowing that she's not in a position to help at all, and like she can't do anything else, right? And then like Charlie's again disappointment when Grandpa Joe gets the candy bar for him, right? And he's like, oh, maybe it's that. And just like that hopelessness, like I'm feeling that as like a kid, especially, and like trying to be like, oh, I can do better, I can do all of this, but really capitalism is fucked, and you're like classism and all of this, and it was just so heartbreaking to watch.
I think the moment that you're talking, or like of the vibe that you're talking about that hit particularly hard, is when he's laying in bed and they're in the other room and he can hear them talking, and it's like the news of like they found the last golden ticket and that's it. And then one of the grandparents is like, oh, somebody should wake Charlie and tell him. And then it's either his mom or Grandpa Joe who's like, let him sleep, let him have one more night of dreams or of hope, like let him just. And then it like cuts to him and he's wide awake, literally crying in his bed, and I'm just like, that is rough. That definitely is like hella sad. And especially as a kid, like how many like times have you been that like you can overhear something happening that you're not supposed to, and it just like crushes you or it changes you to some degree.
And then like at the end he starts to kind of like accept that too, and he's just like, I bet the ticket makes the chocolate taste bad. It's fine. I would rather like and it's just like that level of disappointment, and like also knowing that like that's not his fault and that's not his mom's fault. Like it's just like it is the world. And then like in that same way, that's why like this movie like on a bigger whole is like this whole thing about capitalism and classism and stuff like that. And like literally the only way for him to get out is to get lucky, So what does that say about the world and politics and all of these other things,
And even him getting lucky isn't him getting lucky, because the only reason he's there is to be controlled in the end, is to be used as somebody else's puppet to carry on this legacy of industrial capitalism, especially without his knowledge. Like he's not being told like, I'm using you. It's just like, you're a child and you'll listen to whatever I say. Like, yeah, I will. Here's the world. Okay. Like, what the fuck? Yeah, the more I think about it, the more it's fucked. I still love this movie. Also, like,
fucking love this movie.
Right? It's rough stuff. I mean, especially what it has to say about like authority and like authoritative figures. So it's like
the teacher. Ooh,
yes.
Can we get into him?
So it's the teacher. It's literally all of the grandparents, including Joe. The only exception of authority figures is his mom and him. Because even Willy Wonka, obviously, all of the parents of all the kids, Slugsworth to some degree, because it's just entrapment, and he's doing the bidding of this villainous industrial capitalist. And then
he's a willing participant.
He's a willing participant. He knows what's going on. Who are the other adults? the
All the
adults who try to
parents.
take all of the parents, the adults who try to take the ticket from Charlie in the crowd,
The one that tried to do the supercomputer to figure out where the last ticket was and stuff like that. And like looking at like the teacher specifically, like and the way that he asserts dominance over these kids, where he like is like, do you know this? Of course you don't, and I'm not going to tell you, right? And he's like, by the way, we're taking exams before we learn this stuff because I said so. I can't figure that out. Let's make this easier. Like, and he's just like at every turn, just trying to like make sure everybody knows that he's the one in control and he's smarter than everybody else.
It's also so overt the way he's just manipulating these kids. Like, again, it's just like, do you know what that means? Of course you don't, because if you knew that, then you'd be the teacher, and I'd be the student, and that's preposterous, you absolute moron. And you're like, wait, we're just doing chemistry here. Like, what the fuck are you doing? And then even again, the other day, like the next day when the kid runs through the halls, and he's like, we're going to go buy the chocolate. And then the guy's like, class dismissed. Like, I need to go figure this out, so I don't care about you guys. And then he's like, well, no, it's actually this. He's like, oh, no, class in session, never mind. I can't get what I need. And then it's like, no, it's like actually happening. He's like, oh yeah, for real, class dismissed. I don't care what you do. I'm gonna go buy some chocolate. Like, fuck off. All of the authority figures in this are just painted like fucking scumbags, and I love it. Like, I love, and especially juxtaposing with like these people of privilege, these people who have what it is that Charlie wants, or what Charlie thinks he wants to some degree. I mean, not what he thinks he wants, like a fucking livable life is all he wants. And these people who have so much more than that, they have however many times over of that life that he has, they have it in these huge piles just for whatever, and they don't give a shit. So all of these people who are painted in such a negative light, these authority figures who are in places of privilege and in places of wealth, I love that they're painted poorly. I love that they're painted bad. They're poor in character, whereas Charlie's rich in character, and that's the whole vibe of like, he's rich in character but poor fiscally, and then they're fiscally well off but poor in character. Like,
and also too, like the everybody that has a profession is always bad at their profession, like in a little bit. Like anybody that's supposed to have that sort of like, you know, knowledge authority over whatever. Like the newscaster says on all 5 continents, right? Like there's these little like throwaway lines where it's like, don't you mean, wait, hold on, 5? Yeah. 5? And then there's another part where like Wonka does like math, right? And like my TV's mom, who's a teacher, is like, wait, but that's 105% or something, right? And he just like is like, oh well, whatever, it's fine. Like there's also like a point where they say like 500 billion people in the world, and then like, so like all of these facts and figures are always a little bit off and a little bit wrong, right? Like the teacher is saying like, you only opened 2 candy bars. I can't do that. That's too hard. Let's say you opened 200, right?
Oh,
because
yeah.
like, you know, so like all of these just like really small, subtle lines just to like kind of undermine, to show that nobody knows what the fuck they're talking about. And
the whole system's fucked. Yeah. The system's fucked, and it's not the point of privilege and like the point where you exist in the world has nothing to do other than anything besides chance. Right?
Yeah.
To this degree where it's like...
Also, like, you know, being rich and white, because the only places that these winning chocolate bars, which were planted by Slugworth, were rich white communities or rich white countries, right?
Yeah.
And the fucking Paraguay counterfeit, where, of course, it had to be, like, that's like, the only, like, time that they really mention, like, you know, a country that is not rich and white.
Yes.
So
emphasis on not white. Emphasis on not white, because it's very clear, like, of all the people, it's these 5 super rich, super white families, and like that's just the story.
Well, yeah, and then it's like, oh, okay, so you're trying to say that, you know, they will cheat and steal to get what they like. So it's just like that whole narrative too, which tracks with Roald Dahl, right? Is just like, this sucks. But like, yeah, just those little moments. Like, I had to pause and be like, wait, did they just say 5 continents?
Yeah. I mean, I'd noticed a lot of that, especially with like the teacher being like, oh, I can't do that math. It's like simple math, but it's like, oh, I'm not going to do that. I can't do that. And we're going to say you said this. Just undermining those authoritative figures. And like, it's so intentional, and you're so right. It's like these people who are in these places of such authority just not knowing basic shit and not knowing the simple things It's all a facade. It's all fake.
The way that they're built for the exploitation of labor of not just, other communities, but also animals, and also, like there's like the geese where it's like, oh, don't tell the geese that it's not Easter because I want to get ahead for next year, right? So just
yeah,
straight up like exploiting like in literally every way they can, which they're also not really hurting for money, which is fucked. Then like, with like the whole, secretiveness of corporations that build dreams, we know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But like I got like a big vibe of that in this film, because it was just like, oh yeah, I've been there, right? So like they want to share dreams with the world, but they want to control the narrative around it. And so they like in the same breath, kind of like we talked about with Wonka, where he says like, it's so easy, anybody can do it. But also in the same breath, he says, no, don't do that. Right? You have to think how I want you to think. You have to act how I want you to act, that whole thing. So they're like these corporations also act as like gatekeepers of happiness, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where they don't want it to come from others. They want it to come from them. And that's why there's all of the secrecy. That's why they're, they treat their workers the way that they do, right? And like, are incredibly oppressive in a lot of the ways that they go about things. They're afraid of stealing. Like, oh my God, okay, cool. In like, I think the 20s, there were actually like chocolate wars and like, stealing of, and like big chocolate espionage, like, I guess, was something I read. Just all of that. And like then creating scarcity to drive up sales, which like legit, like this movie like has like a small point where like it shows that leads to mental health issues. The guy is talking to his therapist and he's just like, Wonka bars, Wonka blah blah blah. And then like this woman gets her husband gets kidnapped, and he's just like, we want your Wonka bars. And she's like,
do I have an hour to think about it?
Yeah.
I'll do anything except that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just like showing the ways in which like these big brands not only like, and like how capitalism allows them to thrive, but also how its effect on the collective consciousness and on society as a whole, and how we treat each other and all of this. So it's just and then like in the end, for him to like go back on his word with what he was going to give everybody, because he didn't allow them to read the terms and conditions, right, of this contract that he forced these children to sign. So like, and
comically small font, which was like the whole deal. That was the joke, right?
So all of that is just so fucking smart and so intentional and so great. And I love that the film itself, while being a critique, is also like exists because of this mania, right?
Yeah,
like so
100%.
It builds up the mania in the film like for 40 minutes, like we talked about. And it was also, this film is sponsored by Quaker. So like, it's so fucking meta.
I think with this, the more I talk about it, the more I love this movie. I think it's so well done and so good. Like you said, I mean, it's like gatekeeping this idea of dream, of hope. It's repackaging joy and selling it. Like even when they're in the hall licking the wallpaper, and Virgo's like, the schnozberries, who's ever heard of a schnozberry? And he like pinches her mouth and is like, we are the music makers, we are the dreamers of dreams. Like, and we is so insidious. It's just like, we decide this, we created this is ours. Like,
it's like him and God. What is that? Is that who you're talking about?
Yeah, right. Like, so there's just a level of, and again, this movie does a really good job. Again, they spend 40 minutes instilling in the audience like, this is mania. Like, people go off for this company. Like, it is the epitome of an intentional capitalist fandom.
And it makes me very happy that it's not like the book, and that Roald Dahl hated it. That makes me love this even more, because
100%.
Because I feel like this with our podcast, we always talk about like when you create something, you have choice, and it doesn't matter if it wasn't that way in the story before. Whatever you do, you have a choice. And so the choices that were made in this film, the majority of them, I mean, there's still some that are questionable, like we've already talked about, but the majority of them were just so thoughtful and so good that, like, yeah, I can stand this movie, even though Roald Dahl wrote the script,
Yeah, what, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm happy that so much of it had to be changed, and I'm happy that he hates it. Again, like I said earlier, like, to me, if I made something that some Nazi asshole hated, I'm pumped, stoked. Like, why would anything that I create be even close to anything that person would enjoy? Like, I mean, that would be incredibly telling on me, right? If I had created something that some anti-Semitic asshole was vibing with or saw some goodness in, I'd be like, wait, what? Hold on. I need to...
Let me think about this.
Let me be a little introspective here, because there's something that I need to figure out with that.
It's truly, like, so good, and so, like, and even, like, when you think about, like, the thing, right, that Slugworth wanted the kids to get, which is the everlasting gobstopper, right, which was made specifically for poor people, right? He says for kids that don't have a lot of money, right? So, like, Slugworth wants you to steal the most inconsequential, the least profitable thing from this company to see if you are a good person, if you are honest or not. Right. Yeah. Like, and also the fact that exists as another way to instill brand loyalty, even in people that don't have money for that. Right. So maybe they'll go work, or maybe they'll, but they are now suddenly stands of your brand.
What little money you have will make it so you can still give that to us.
Also, fucking Wonka isn't paying anybody. So like, he could make all of his chocolate way cheaper if he wanted to. I'm just saying, like, he could also just pay his fucking workers too.
Yeah, I mean, he's a villain. I know I'd said earlier that he wasn't on the surface, but like at the end of the day, he is villainous. He is the epitome of industrial capitalism. He's bad. Like, geez, yeah. I didn't even think about the gobstopper thing, just as far as like instilling even in the lowest income communities brand loyalty.
It's like, here we see you.
Yeah.
Like the smallest of smallest and smallest of things.
Yeah. We'll make sure that you can still afford to give us money. Don't worry.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll make you feel good about it.
And you'll feel like it's a deal. Yeah.
So fucking gross.
It's great to watch and like not be like, you can like turn your brain off and watch this and it's great. You can have your brain fully fucking on and watch this and get things out of it that you never expected.
Yeah.
And yeah, what a delight.
It's a good movie. I think the only thing I want to end on is the knife cart of the like, I guess he's supposed to be like the soothsayer at the beginning with Charlie, as Charlie's like on looking into the Wonka estate. The guy with the knife cart comes over and like, I think it's the nobody ever goes in and nobody ever comes out.
What an interesting thing that he has knives on him while he says that as he's looking at capitalism.
Yeah, it's supposed to, like, this person who's critiquing Wonka, who's critiquing, like, the insidiousness of something that on the surface looks very joyous and fun and friendly and for kids and for the child and all of us. The one person in this story who is adding any kind of critique to what would be that sellable product is depicted as scary and bad. He's like covered in knives, like ooh, stay away from this scary person. They're so scary. Look, they're big knife cart. His critique is also scary. Stay away from the critique. It's just so fun. And then the tunnel, the scary tunnel, like no way of knowing.
So apparently nobody knew what he was going to do. Like for that scene, he had not rehearsed it in front of anybody, right? So there's a couple of parts in this movie that were very improv or like first reaction, like holy shit, right? Or not improv, but yeah, like just like that scene with like the chocolate room, right? Where they like all go in. The kids had not seen it yet. Right?
Oh, no
so
shit.
Their reaction was like 100% like real. So just like, can you imagine? Like that river was also actually fucking chocolate, in case anybody was wondering.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, so apparently it started smelling really bad. So at a certain point, so they ended up like when they did the remake, they used fake chocolate for the river. It's a
I
thing.
I would
But
I would honestly hope that they would use fake because like you can't you can't keep that like it's not going to stay smelling yummy. Like
no, yeah.
it's a natural product that will start to decay.
And also just that whole scene when he's like walking down and he has to make sure to stop everybody because they're not allowed to get in front of him. And so like anytime they start to catch up, he steps back and like, puts his cane in front of them. Like, again, feeding into capitalism and that whole thing.
Well, it's also just a dance of control.
Yes,
like they're doing
exactly.
like a little walk down, and he's making sure like if I step back, you have to step back with me. He's guiding them into the realization that he is the one who's in charge, reinstilling this almost Pavlovian style, but in a little stair dance with his cane. Veruca almost gets in front of him, and he slams the cane on the whatever right in front of her face. She's like, huh. Yeah, 100%. It's reinstilling that dominance in these characters.
And so then, like, the other part that was that he had not, like, nobody, not the director, nobody knew how he was going to perform that poem when they were in the boat in the tunnel from hell, where it's like you see a
terrifying
chicken and their head get cut off and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, fucking horrifying. But nobody knew how he was going to perform that. So, like, when he did, he scared the shit out of everybody because they didn't know that was coming. They didn't know how he was going to deliver. They had no fucking idea. So, like, the kids were actually, like, afraid of him after that a little bit because they thought that he might actually be crazy. But, like, part of the reason he played that part the way... And he does such a good job because, like, Wilder also... knew he's like, this guy is a crazy rich CEO whatever guy that is like on the brink there, so he knew what he was doing. And God, so good, so jarring, but so good. So
I mean, even in there, like that as a scare tactic on a character level, I mean, for that, I mean, that scene by itself, it's like this tunnel, we don't know where we're going, and then to perform this psychosis in this very physical way to the point where you're scaring these people intentionally, like, it's good. It's scary. I mean, that was fucking scary. I remember as a kid seeing that and being like, this is terrifying.
Well, and that's another way that he just kind of like lets you know that this character is not a good character, right?
Yes. Insidiousness. It's planting the seeds of that insidious nature. I love well, for some reason I'm saying that word a lot today. Insidious. I love that word.
It's a great big word, and I like it a lot too.
It's a good word.
Do you feel smart when you like just pull those out like in casual conversation and you don't even mean to? It's not even like I'm trying to sound smart. You're like,
well, when it feels organic and it is casual and organic that way, it does feel a little like, ooh. Like, oh my God. Okay, Penguin Books giving me a book deal. Get out of my face. Like, Harp, what? Somebody give me a book deal.
In some dreary town, at some dreary time, a young, optimistic paperboy named Charlie Bucket dreams of better days for him and his family. In said town, local, mysterious, and world-famous chocolatier Willy Wonka has announced a golden ticket sweepstakes with a lifetime supply of chocolate and a super-secret grand prize for one lucky kid. Amongst a group of affluent kids from all over the world, Charlie is among the winners. Between Augustus Gloop, Veruca Salt, Violet Beauregard, Mike TV, and Charlie, who will be the mysterious prize recipient?
What's this? A moody and unnecessary backstory about Wonka and his parents that includes childhood trauma and dentistry? As the group tours through the wild world of Willy Wonka, the children begin falling victim to self-imposed accidents. Augustus gets sucked up a pipe, Violet becomes a blueberry, Veruca gets thrown out in the trash, and Mike shrinks himself into a pocket-sized version of himself. The tour ends and Charlie goes home. Wonka spends time to himself and thinks upon what to do about his legacy after plucking his first gray hair. He decides to take Charlie on as a business partner and allows for his family to live happily ever after in the Wonka factory. Hooray?
Yeah, big question mark there because okay, we talk about this a lot and like, did they really need to make this the Batman Wonka version? Because this is just like the darker, grittier, nastier, like, God, this sucks.
it's the whole, I mean, this was in the heyday of make something realistic, and realistic is like in big air quotes, like, so center it in the world of like human emotion that isn't like cartoonish. So if it's something that is cartoonish, make sure that like the character is dealing with some wild childhood trauma. Like I did that whole backstory with him and his parents, and how like his dad was a dentist and that's why he wasn't allowed to eat candy, and then he traveled the world. Like, why? Like, what's the whole, like, I know that largely it's to just to embellish this character a little bit and to give more nuance to this Johnny Depp performance, but at the same time, like, what the first one does in illustrating this character who is like so confident, who is so industrious, who is so ethically disgusting, like, that's just Willy Wonka. Willy Wonka's like this confident asshole who's just great. Like, this Willy Wonka is like very sheepish and very quiet and timid, but also like is supposed to be this charismatic person and is supposed to be like this uber confident character, but it's like, oh well, all of that like shyness comes from his trauma, and it's like I got I'm not buying
big
any
Michael
of it.
Jackson vibes from him.
Yeah,
and I think like that was, and because like this came out in 2005, so I mean, it was no secret that Michael Jackson was gross, right? But like for real though, like he's got the gloves and he's a germaphobe and he's a capitalist and he's a boomer because like, he kept saying like, I can't hear you when you mumble. He wasn't fucking mumbling. Like there's so many things about him in this whole thing, and the voice, like just I fucking hated everything.
Like all of the
this.
choices were so bad, and like that, like you just said, like, oh, I can't hear you when you mumble. They're trying to do that thing that Gene Wilder did, where he's like being incredibly and performatively facetious, and like is constantly misdirecting as a means of comedy. Like that's the choice. It's very intentional. That's what's happening. But in this, I feel like it missed the point. It's like he's just being snotty back at the kid, and there's not really a comedic moment in there. There's no real comedic beat. He's just like, I just don't think you should do this. And it's like, what? Well, no. The joke in the first one was that like he said it this way, and the tone, the cadence is what made this funny. You took that out, and now it's just words that don't really work.
I have a whole section in my notes. We've already talked extensively about how I categorize them meticulously before we record. There's a whole section, which is most of my notes, called Why I Hate It.
Yeah.
And it's like something that bugged me, that kept taking me out of the movie, was when the fuck is this movie supposed to be taking place? Because sometimes it wanted to be like 1800s London, and sometimes it wanted to be 1960s, and sometimes it wanted to be 2000s, and it just didn't, like, Mike TV is playing an Atari, I think, but like it's clearly like an Xbox kind of game that's on the TV, and I'm like, okay, wait. And then like the whole town just looks like a storybook land, right? But like, and they look like, they're just poor Londoners or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But then you have like, I don't know when and where this was supposed to take place. And then I also was like, right off the bat, they were like, we've talked about how in the last one they didn't have, the only time they mentioned another country was when it was like, oh, Paraguay is where the 5th ticket was counterfeited. And in this one, right off the bat, they're like, ooh, Cairo and ooh, Tokyo. And I was like, because it's been a long time since I've seen this. So I was like, oh, I don't remember. Are they from those countries? Like, and then I was like, oh no, we just did that for no reason. And then when they show like the Mania, because like the Mania only has 5 minutes basically to build up, they're like, oh, this is Turkey, and they're trading chickens for candy and stuff like that. So it's like, cool, we're just doubling down on like, racist stereotypes. Fucking why?
Which this movie made some real big swings
the whole
in that
Indian
category.
chocolate thing. Why did that need to be in there? Especially when they made a point to say he figured out how to make chocolate ice cream not melt. Why the fuck? Why?
So this is one of the things, like, part of his unnecessary backstory that we didn't like. Obviously they're getting into this territory of like, oh yeah, he is this industrial capitalist who's like gone to this big air quotes exotic land in search of big air quotes exotic flavors, and that's why he's there, but in the process ends up manipulating this indigenous culture of people, knowing that they, to some degree, worship the cocoa bean. He lies to them and says, "Oh, I'm essentially friends with your god. I can let you talk to your god whenever you want to.
I
Come,
can give you your god
I
because
can
that's
give
how
you
he
your
pays
god."
them.
But the way he communicates that is in some cartoonishly racist, high shrieks and tongue trills. It's
And he
so
uses the word imported. He said the Oompa Loompas were
we're
imported.
imported. They're not people. They're
They're
objects.
not people,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Which again, I mean, it just like anything that was implied in the last one when it comes to like slavery or colonialization, like anything that like even poked the surface of that topic, it was just kind of like, yes, we see that, whatever. But this movie was like, no, it's going to be cute and cartoonish and fun and silly if we show it. Like the only reason you need to show that is if you're critiquing it, but you're not critiquing it. What you're doing is just making it fun and making it silly and making it like wild, which and I mean it in all sincerity. In this case, the word wild being almost a pejorative within this landscape, right? Like it's the exotification of other cultures and of other ideas and thinking that like these ideas of religion based in this culture are silly. Like he thinks it's silly and stupid. And he also gaslights this entire indigenous population and convinces them that he's low-key their god. He's friends with their god, the Cocoa. Like, you know what I mean? That whole subplot was so like, why? First of all, why? Like, we don't need that exposition. We don't need this. That adds literally nothing else to the story. Like, you're not going into a further backstory of the Oompa Loompas, who they are. Like, you could have just said, yes, I brought them here. Would have sufficed.
And this is all supposed to be okay because he's like, I saved them because there was like, he literally says that because there was like all of these bad things and they were getting gobbled up and there's all these monsters and stuff, right? And then he talks to them like they're like furthering your point about like how he doesn't respect them. He like talks to them like they're children. He summons them like in such like a gross way. And then like he also uses them as like test subjects and stuff too. And then like also like the only time the Oompa Loompas ever speak English too is when they're singing the songs, right? They never fucking smile. They just have like this perma frown. Like, and so it's supposed to be like, look, we're happy, but that sucked. And then also the music choices for this too, like anytime like the Oompa Loompas were singing, it was a different version of a genre that was created by non-white, by black people, right? And so I'm like, oh, cool. Like, so now you're doubling down, you're tripling down on this, like on like even like these really fucking subtle levels. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there are so many wrong choices made. When you were going to say the music, I was like, you can say Oingo Boingo. You can say it. You can say it. It's fine. Well, to even further that, too, like, even later when Willy Wonka does that sort of, like, black affect when they're in the testing room where he says, like, slide me some skin, soul brother. Like, I feel like a lot of this stuff that's in this script is supposed to be, like, fun or cute or silly, but it's not, I mean, it's not. That had nothing to do with anything, and it's just this, like, I mean, it's this group of white people doing, like, it's bad. It's just bad, right? Like, there's not anything else to it apart from these are choices that are being made where it's like, oh, yeah, that kind of a voice is silly. It's like, no, that's not silly. That's just co-optive culture, and that's black voice. Like, there's nothing about that that's funny or silly. You're just intentionally choosing not to have that discussion because this is a movie about white people for white people.
And it's so wild because like a lot of these were choices. Like he made a choice to like change the date even and the locations and the like of when the original story happened, right? And then he like had this choice instead of building the mania over 45 minutes, he made the movie longer and gave that 45 minutes to Wonka's backstory, right?
And the post story of him like considering giving the like what was that? At the end of the tour, it's like, okay, go home now, and you're like, wait, what's happening? And it's like the whole shoe shine moment where he's like shining his shoes, and then decides that he's gonna like be his partner.
Like, that's also
What?
gross. Also gross.
Yeah.
Also, there was no Slugworth, so there was really no, like, tension other than, like, Olive Wonka's tragic backstory where parents is, like, saying parents is, he's got daddy issues, right? Which I never realized, but Tim Burton really likes to talk about daddy issues in his movies.
Yeah.
Every movie is basically daddy issues. But yeah, so anyways, going back to my why, my why area, they, like, instead of building the Mania over 45 minutes, they built it over 10 and just used two, what I assumed were two gay people that were walking their dogs to spread the rumors of this stuff, right?
Also, that
like,
incredibly queer coding of those two characters who are just this, like, broken-wristed, femme,
Yes.
assumed cis men walking their dogs and being like, well, I heard that this is the ba-da-da-da-da-da, well, ba-da-da-da-da-da. And it's like, what?
like, okay.
But again, like, which, to me, very silly. And I was kind of just like, oh my God, this is funny. But it does, again, in a movie that's, like, making the wrong choice about its depiction of character, again, to make the only two, like, assumed queer-coded characters, these two gay men, to be, like, gossip and, like, ooh, this is a bun. I'm just like, I mean, like, sure. Like, just, why not? Like, I mean, everything else, like, I just...
Also, can we talk
Mess.
about that TV room scene where it's like just 5 minutes of Space Odyssey because Tim Burton just
Yes.
really wanted to fucking insert himself into the Kubrick
Kubrick canon.
Kubrick cinematic universe. So he's like,
Yeah.
oh, look, see, I did this. Oh, see, ha ha ha. I do have a question here for you on that. How stoked do you think Kubrick would be if he found out that that's what happened to his masterpiece?
I mean, that to me, I thought it was kind of fun only because of how in its own ass it is. Like, he thinks so highly of himself. Like, within this movie, it's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna make some sort of directorial commentary on this by putting this, like, fun fact. It's like, well, it's a very well-known movie, and, like, The Pillar, it's like, it's gonna be a Wonka bar. I kind of liked it. I mean,
But children
Kubrick,
aren't going to know what this is. Like,
No,
that is like,
it's some
who is your
self-indulgent
audience?
directorial shit. But I thought it was very silly, especially just in the sense of, like, I know that 2001 was, like, fantastic, and I know that Kubrick is hailed as, like, this visionary director. But the fact that in this movie it's almost just, like, pissing on his movie a little bit. I like any sort of, like, confident, abusive assholes when they can get knocked down a peg, I'm into it, no matter who it's coming from, really. So, like, the fact that Burton is like, I'm gonna make the monolith a Wonka bar and that's gonna be funny for me, I'm like, yeah, make Kubrick mad. Like, I don't care. Like, I mean, you suck too. Like, there's levels of both of you guys suck. So, like, yeah, if you want to take the piss out of him a little bit, like, why not? Go for it. That was one of the things about this movie that I enjoyed. I think, blanket statement for the whole thing, what I liked about this movie largely was the visuals. I loved the aesthetic. I liked that it was so ambiguous as far as time and place. Because the fact that it was like, it could be the late 50s, but it also could be the late 80s, somewhere maybe mid 70s, who knows, and that, like, varied. I was kind of into it. And like, just the blending of historical styles. Of, like, you have some sort of, like, Art Deco decor, you have some of this, like, early 80s costume, like, you're having all of these different moments. I mean, the story, I want to be clear, I don't like this movie, but there's elements of it, like that in particular. Like, I think some of the composition was really great. I think some of the choices as far as, like, how they're showing things, how they're framing things, I really enjoyed. And just the visual aesthetic, I was, like, really into. But
I think you and I have very different takes on this movie, and this happens so rare that I'm so excited because I don't even want to give this movie that. Like, I'm just
Really?
like, yeah, I'm like, everything is just so, like, grotesque to me in this movie, like, in a way where it's like, oh, we need you to know how poor Charlie Bucket and his family are. So
Yeah.
we're just gonna, the house was already dilapidated, but we're just gonna put it at a hard, like, 30-degree angle.
Yeah.
Even the doors and stuff. Oh my God, isn't that so fun? That's so fun.
Well,
like,
that's like
want to
the
talk
biggest
about
Tim Burton thing, though. He does that in like.
Okay, he's also, I know we've talked about this, but he's become a caricature into and of himself.
Oh,
so
without
it's
a
like
doubt.
his earlier works are fun to me, but then
Yeah.
or like it I haven't seen them in a long time, but like I remember them being fun, the like the style, the visual, like okay, that's cool. But then like he just slowly goes more and more and more, like leans into it as much as the house is leaning into it, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, like I get
Yeah.
that. Look, I know this is a Tim Burton movie. You don't have to convince me. Like,
Yeah, you
I
don't.
fucking know.
I know what I'm getting into here. You don't have to like reiterate or reinstill or even reinvent yourself here. Like we don't need that. Like just we know what we're signing up for. Let us live with
Also,
it.
like his like morals or whatever he's trying to say and all this. First of all, I also want to say Roald Dahl fucking hates children, and he loves to watch children get hurt and get destroyed and all of that.
Yeah.
Right? This is apparent in everything that we've reviewed from him. Like I didn't even realize. Speaking of that, Matilda goes into an Iron Maiden when she's
Yes.
bad.
Oh
Like,
my
that
God.
kind of stuff. Like okay,
Oh.
like y'all, like re-examine your connection with Dahl.
I want to watch Matilda again so bad. It's been so long.
Oh, I do too. Is there a remake? Can we do it for the pod?
I don't know if there's a remake. They did the musical, but I don't know if that would like translate.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. I'm sure there's one in the works.
There probably is.
That's big nostalgia bait right there. Especially if Danny DeVito was back on board in whether it's directorial or acting or whatever. Like,
there's a remake of Matilda coming to Netflix.
oh really? Okay, so they're working on it.
Oh yeah, interesting. Okay, I'll have to look that up later. But anyways, so in the same way that like before his style and like his messaging was maybe a little bit more pointed and maybe a little bit less beat you over the head and less noisy, I guess. Like for this, right? Like you are watching a movie about this, right?
Yeah.
And in this movie, like a big narrative is TVs are bad, they make you dumb. But watch our movie and take our chocolate from this TV. And that I found that so meta, which is like cool, but also like he didn't know what he wanted to say with this movie. He didn't know what he wanted to do. He's just like, ooh, maybe we can make, wouldn't it be fun? I mean, I'm sure this is in the book, but wouldn't it be fun if like, and like ironic if Wonka's dad was a dentist? Oh my God, how fun would that be? Isn't that
Wouldn't
cute?
that be so silly?
Oh my God, and then they haven't talked forever, but his dad just like keeps all of the news clippings, and so it's fine because like men are so bad at talking about their feelings. Oh my God, like isn't that great?
The worst.
I hated it.
I do want to bring up how fat phobic this movie is. I mean, I think the last movie that we talked about that was this fat phobic was another Roald Dahl film. But in this one, I know in the first one there is the acknowledging of like Augustus Gloop, who is supposed to be this sort of gluttonous, obviously fat, obviously like eats too much. That's like his character. His character is surrounded by this fact that he's insatiably eating, like whatever. Okay, great, cool. What? Fine. In this one, like at least in the first one, there's a little bit of a commentary, but it's kind of just like, no, that's just Augustus. And it's not really an issue until he falls into the river, right? Mm-hmm. It's just kind of like there. But this movie like made it very clear, like with the grandparents and with a lot of people, it's like when he's on the news, one of the grandparents is like, "Told you he'd be a porker. What a repulsive boy."
Yeah.
And then when the girl show, when I think it's Veruca is on TV, they're like, "She's even worse than the fat boy." And then later on, like the way that they're talking about him as he's going up the pipe, it's like this unnecessary, just like, oh my God, can he eat himself out and blah, blah, blah. And it's like all this, like that wasn't really like in the first one. It's like added just noise of fat phobic rhetoric. And then on top of that, later in the depiction of Violet when she becomes a blueberry, whereas in the first one, she's depicted, she just blows up into a ball. Mm-hmm. Like she's a blueberry. That's the deal. In this one, it's like this CGI monstrify scene of like, her becoming this sort of, it's not a ball, but this like amorphous blob, and pictured of like an obese monster, the way she like grows, and like the way she's like morphing and rolling, and there's this like horrible orchestration behind it that's like terrifying and scary, and like, ooh, it's like she's not becoming a blueberry, she's just becoming fat. You're showing her get fat, and you're like telling us, the audience, like, be afraid of that, be afraid of fatness, be afraid of fat people. Like, if you hadn't already like dictated that early on with the characters who we're supposed to like, who we're supposed to be into, they're the ones fat shaming this kid. And like, even later when it's like he's eating his fingers, she's like, don't eat your fingers. He's like, but it tastes so good. Which, okay, fine, whatever. Yeah, this movie just like at every moment it would make some sort of like fat phobic joke or some sort of like fat shaming notion, which again, completely unnecessary. Like, the story is already predicated on this idea that Augustus Gloop is gluttonous. Whoa, what a phrase. Augustus Gloop is gluttonous. Right? So, like, you don't... In the first one, did a great job about, like, not necessarily being like, oh, what a fat piece of shit. Look at this stupid big fat boy. Fat boy eats food. Like, what? Why? Like, that's insane to me that this is... That's like, a fun part of the story. Like, oh, this awful bitch child is worse than the fat one. You're like... What? Why? What is this script? Like, what's the fucking point of that? Like,
yeah.
I don't. I mean, well, I get it. I get it based on the other choices that he's made. Like, they're the wrong choices, and it's not good. But at the same time, it's like, man, like, you're just really gonna fire on all cylinders of slander to some degree. Like, let's be racist colonizer. Let's be fat phobic asshole. Let's be like, let's just do it all. Fucking go.
And they have to like, that's one of the things that really fucking bugs me with Tim Burton, at like, you know, at least like late Tim Burton, right? Like I haven't gone back and watched like Edward Scissorhands or anything, but like, I mean, probably. But like,
yeah,
there was at least some sort of subtleness into like, everything didn't have to be just so overt and so over the top in order to try to like get this point across. So like, you know, you're talking about this and that wasn't necessary. And like to further that too, like Augustus always had food on his face, you know?
Yeah,
like,
he was on his shirt, on his face. He was always covered in food of some kind, yeah.
Always painting him as like somebody who's messy and somebody who's grotesque and somebody who's, you know, like that is completely unnecessary. Like the whole fucking thing. Oh, well, I taste so good. Like, yeah, it's just this really gross depiction of fat phobia. And I really, it's one of those things that just like every time that he does that with like something or he's trying to make a point, he can't just make it nuanced. He has to make it overt in a way that's like just incredibly tired and damaging and really in the end doesn't say anything. All it does is it's just showing you like he's doing exactly what Wonka did in the first one, where he's trying to control the narrative and trying to make sure that there's no room for anybody to have a difference of opinion on any of the characters that he, you know, or the way that this world exists, you know?
Yeah. It's like he's trying to construct this narrative that's supposed to be like edgy. I mean, oftentimes Tim Burton is like edgy or like, you know, there's an edginess to his aesthetic and that's his brand. It's like, sweetie, the entire dietary industrial complex and popular culture at large already did this and continues to do it. You're not edgy by being fat phobic. You're literally the most boring version of this take with everything you're espousing here. Like, this isn't an interesting or funny take like, oh, the fat guy's a monster. No. Fat people are told that every day with literally every piece of media they consume. And if it's not media, it's people on the street. It's people like it's constant. It's constant. That's a part of the culture. You moron.
Like, well, and that's what he does with everything, and that's why I have such a problem. Like, let's talk about Violet, right? Violet in the first one wasn't a super big asshole. She was just kind of like really competitive, and she was like, oh, whatever, look at, I've had this piece of gum for 3, like, you know, and it was just kind of like fun and like silly and like, oh, you're so silly, right? But in this one, like, they changed her to be just this fierce competitor who like does karate, I guess. Like, and she's just a super big asshole in this one, which made no sense to me. But like when you distill like what he does, especially with like these remakes and everything, like he distills these characters down to one idea, and then that is their entire trait. That is how, like, so
Yeah.
there's no, like, in the first one it's like competition, okay, fine, and in this one she's like, I am going to destroy you. Like, she has this line where she calls Charlie, she says, I'm not going to lose because I'm not a loser like you, Charlie. Like, that's what he does with everybody, even with like Mike TV, right? Like, oh, well, he liked TV, and TV's bad, so video games, right? He's into violent video games and blah 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 blah. And I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, these characters are not fun. They're not anything. They're just really tired and boring, and I hate all of this.
Yeah. I mean, the only character I'll say who I love, and it's really just because of my own personal bias, is Missy Pyle. Violet Beauregard's mom in this movie is played by Missy Pyle, and I love Missy Pyle. I think she's so cool. She's in most of my favorite movies. I think she's so incredible. And in this one, it's no different. I absolutely love her in this movie. I think the fact that she doesn't fucking blink is such a cool choice to me. Like, she's always just like wide-eyed, like, mm-hmm. I just think she's incredible, and I think she's so good in this movie. That's all I wanted to say about her. I think she's so good.
She was just there to be like, they switched the dad for mom in this one, in my opinion, just so that way mom could hit on Wonka, right?
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, that's sad and gross. Cool. And then like she's trying to live through her daughter, like, you know, like, and I was just, oh, cool.
And here's my baton trophy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's me.
And yeah, she is very sad as a character. It's just not a good movie. Yeah, it's not good. It really, like, honestly, the choices that Johnny Depp made, I know we went over this earlier, but like the sort of like timidness, it didn't work. And like, I didn't like it. I didn't like him. I didn't like the character.
It's just incredibly jarring. Like, he's trying to be this like kid, right? And this is how he thinks kids act, right? Like, at every point, like, okay, we get it. He has daddy issues. He feels threatened by these children, right? Like, and in so many ways, he's still a child, where he says, I was never short like you, right? Like, you know, you suck. Like, he has all of these moments, and anytime like one of the other children says something smart, he interrupts them and belittles them and puts them down. And that's not what... I'm only basing this on the 1971 film, but that's not what he was about, you know? And like,
no.
And to me, that's like just doing such a disservice to both the character and to Gene Wilder's performance.
Yeah.
Because I think there was just such a level of nuance with that. And then this one, it's just, everything is like, Wonka, gum is gross. You know, I can't understand what you're saying. And like in the last one, he knew every kid. He knew their name. He knew their story, whatever. And in this one, he's like, oh, kid. Like, he refers to everybody as kid because he doesn't remember which one is which, and he doesn't care.
And that doesn't make... And it makes no sense, because especially for somebody who is as powerful and mysterious and is so meticulous and such a like a perfectionist in this way, the cards thing, like him having cards and not knowing, I'm like, that's the wrong choice. Mm-hmm. I don't buy it. I don't buy this character at all. Like, for somebody...
The gloves. Why the gloves? Why would
Yeah,
he...
also why the gloves? Also, and like you said, why doesn't he know their names? Like, in the first one, it was very clear. He knew exactly what he was doing. This was orchestrated. It was meticulous. It was perfect. And that's the insidiousness of this fucking industrial capitalist. And that's like the story. But in this, he's also that. But he like couldn't be bothered to learn these things because he's like sheepish and shy and like just anxious. And that's why
everybody's
I'm like
beneath him.
Yeah, but I don't buy it. Like, I just don't buy that. Because like in the other one, I'm like, oh, he played them like whatever. Like, I believe that this guy is kind of a madman. Like, this person is scary bad. Whereas Johnny Depp is just like not scary. He's not scary bad. He's just like bad at being bad.
Mm-hmm. they tried to take all of the nuance from the other characters and put them into this character. And it's like, I don't need to know about Willy Wonka's dad. This movie is called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I literally have no notes for Charlie other than he's poor. And because we have to make that very, very clear, right? He's the only one excited about anything because he has nothing, which we covered in the last one. And his character just serves to ask questions to make Wonka reflect on himself, because anytime Charlie opens his mouth, basically we have a parents woo, kind of flashback, and I'm just like, oh, this is boring, I fucking hate this. The only line that Charlie says, like, that he actually has for himself is, Candy doesn't have to have a point. And I was just like this movie.
this movie.
This doesn't have any point. Why is this called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory when this movie is not about Charlie even in the slightest? And Charlie is like the only one that's even somewhat responsible, right? Like, he's trying to sell he wants to sell that ticket because they're in poverty, adults, the whole thing, nobody can do anything. But the adults, like, because of capitalism and because of scarcity and because of all of this, they tell him, no, you have to do this because this is never going to happen again, and X, Y, and Z, right? When he's like, yeah, but I would like to eat something other than cabbage soup. And the one thing that I thought was interesting about this film is how it portrays capitalism as the cause of and solution to misery and inequality and life's problems and stuff. I don't think that was intentional because I'll go with the dad. The dad is a factory worker who puts lids on toothpaste. And then he's fired because of this whole Wonka craze that happens because they need more toothpaste because there's more cavities. So they have a machine do it, right? And so he's fired. And then at the end, he becomes the person that operates that machine. So it's fine. But then also, if you think about it too, Wonka is selling all of this candy, rotting people's teeth, giving business to Daddy, right? So, that's, another, symbiotic relationship. And I'm just like, that's all on paper cool, but...
It just doesn't translate.
No.
And, even the notion that... I feel like he was also trying to do that thing with the parents and authority figures that the first one did, where it's let's make sure that we, paint them as bad and bad people. I don't think that was executed well enough in this. And a couple times that there was the scene when he gets the golden ticket in the store, I like that more than I liked the first one, where it's these adults are trying to buy it off of him.
Mm-hmm.
I like that as a choice, where it's oh, I'll give you $50, I'll give you $100, and then the store clerk is leave him alone, kid, go, you should go home now. I mean, my only problem with it is that the one black actor is again in the very same trope to be sort of all-knowing, sort of the wise character, the wise character of color has one line in the store to say, Charlie, you should go home. I like the idea that the adults were trying to buy the ticket from him. I thought that was a nice addition. It was a nice plussing of the first one. But even in that cool choice to be these authoritarian figures are bad, and in this world these adults are bad, that's just wrapped up in this problematic trope and sort of using characters of color in this way.
Cool choice, bro.
Yeah, it just again, anything that's even remotely thoughtful is wrapped in a blanket of problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not a good movie. I remember seeing it in theaters and thinking it was fine. It was a movie, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And rewatching it, I'm it's just not good. It's not a good movie by any means. I mean, I remember the Hot Topic craze that came with this. Hot Topic had a field day of the top hat and the goggles and the Willy Wonka merch.
They love Tim Burton, let's be honest.
That's the Tim Burton store.
It is. And we're back.
We're back. We've made it back. We brought it back.
Eric.
Yeah.
Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, 1971. Who was this for?
I mean, it was for Gene Wilder. That movie was for Gene Wilder. That was Gene Wilder's movie, without a doubt. That's what I'm saying. Because the audience itself, I mean, you said it like, I guess was a flop, a flop Tina, as it were, in the box office.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm just gonna say Gene Wilder because he ate it up. That was his movie.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it was for Gene Wilder. A hundred
Yeah.
percent. That's what I was gonna say, and so then I'm just like, well.
Oh, cool.
Um, so Gene Wilder, also '90s babies. I think this movie was just really ahead of its time
Yeah.
for especially the critique on capitalism in just this very nuanced and subtle way that it had. I mean, like, it took us actually reviewing it like this for me to realize like how fucking deep that goes.
Yeah.
Um, did you like it?
I did. I mean, I truly forgot how many times I'd seen it as a kid and how like embedded or like how much nostalgia I feel for the story. Like I just hadn't recognized it until watching it and then having the reaction I did emotionally to like certain moments in the story and really remembering a lot of these scenes beat for beat. I was like, "Oh fuck. I guess this movie was big for me." Um so with that, yeah, I think it's a great movie. I think it's really good, great performances. I think it's great. How about you? What do you think?
I also think that it is really great. I was excited to watch this, even if I was
Yeah.
like, even if it like ended up to be trash. I was like, I still stand this movie, you know, like, but truly, like, what a gift this movie is, and
Yeah.
like, it's so thoughtful in a way that I didn't expect. So like, I'm just
Mhm.
incredibly surprised, and it just really is just so 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 good. Like
It
I
is.
it's one of my favorite films still, you know, to
Yeah.
this day. So
Classique.
look at we've had like two back to back that we really love. How
I
cool is
know.
that? Oh, we never do this.
um
Eric,
yes.
the 2005 remake, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Was this new and interesting or the same? Progressive, regressive? How has the story evolved with today's ideals?
No. Across the board. No, I'm just kidding. Um it I don't think was new or interesting. I think aesthetically it was interesting because it looked different, like the colors were a bit more vibrant and what have you, but apart from that, no, I think it was regressive because I think it missed a lot of the point that the first one was trying to make, especially as far as like the backstory and like trying to add some humanization to it, which just it just you're trying to make the lead or this character more empathetic and more human, but like you just missed the whole point in it. So I thought it was regressive in that way. Uh, I think it's kind of stagnated. I mean, I feel like it's the same story but just a worse version of it. And that story was what, the early 70s, whereas this was the mid 2000s, and I like it changed nothing. If anything changed about the story, it was for the worse. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it has. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that it's new, but it's absolutely not interesting, and I think it's
Yeah.
just incredibly regressive. Like we took out 40 minutes of the building of capitalism, which this is a whole anti-capitalist story, like at least the first one was, and just gave that to a dude that has daddy issues. And so like none of that makes sense. It's also just so regressive in its portrayal of like of masculinity too, and of like, you know, oh, daddy actually like clips all of the papers, you know, so he does love you. Like he never says sorry. They don't really make up or anything, but that's supposed to be resolved and resolve the whole thing. It's also regressive because like they use the hard R in this. It's
Oh,
2005
I
and
forgot
they
to
use
bring
the
that up.
hard R. Like, and
Yeah.
I was like, okay, why? Like in that way that like, you know, again, like we've talked about so many times before in the early 2000s, 2010s, and even now, like so many of the remakes are just the darker, grittier version, trying to give backstory for things that you don't like. good characterization does not necessarily mean you need to talk about backstory. It doesn't mean like character work is incredibly important. I think that's one of the most important things about a story, because then like that character and like their story is like their personal story is going to dictate how they move forward and react to things in the story. But without but the story didn't even really do the work of that story. It was just like he had braces. So yeah, I just I really, really, really don't like when they just try to make a story new by talking about a backstory that wasn't fucking needed. Like, this doesn't...
Without a doubt.
It didn't add anything to the story. In fact, it took away from the overall messaging. And I wasn't even sure what the messaging was supposed to be, because, like, they didn't even really tell you anything. Like, is Tim Burton okay? Like, are him and his dad okay? Like, because how many fucking daddy stories does he have, you know? And I'm just like...
I mean,
like,
now that you bring it up, arguably every single one of them.
Every single one of them, yeah. I was like, wow. Basically every story except, like... The Corpse Bride and Coraline, I guess, like, but like for the most part, the majority of them, and I'm just like, okay, why does there have to be this tragic backstory? Like this, like a tragic backstory doesn't make somebody interesting, and that doesn't tell me anything about the character necessarily. Yeah. So just another example of like, instead of adding nuance, they just added noise that made me really upset and made me want to turn this off.
Yeah,
so,
100%. I do like that we've come to the conclusion that the two things you can rely on from a Tim Burton movie are Helena Bonham Carter and daddy issues. the two staples.
Angles.
The two staples of the Burton
Danny
catalog.
Elfman.
And Danny Elfman. I'm so sorry. Yes, three things: Danny Elfman, Helena Bonham Carter, and daddy issues.
Ooh. Who is this for?
Probably Hot Topic merchandising department. They got on those top hats and goggles very quick. Who do you think it was for?
Oh, I think this was 100% for Tim Burton. This felt like a self-congratulatory piece of shit where, like, I mean, he did the 2001 Space Odyssey thing in a children's movie, knowing that, or what is supposed to be a children's film, knowing that most 10-year-olds have not seen or don't even know what 2001 Space Odyssey is. And that was a whole fucking bit in this. So it's just like... And the only way that is funny is if you know that film. Yeah. Right? So, anyways...
especially for the platform, it feels a little gatekeepery. Like, oh, I know this and you don't.
Yay, we hate that.
Hooray.
Did you like it?
Oh, no. No, it's not good. I don't think I liked it then, and like, especially now, like I don't like it. I mean, granted, Missy Pyle is perfect, but apart from that, I think
she had like two lines.
I know, and they were great. Every line was perfect. We loved it. Yeah. Did you like it?
Hell no. Like, I hated it the first time I saw it, and I hated it this time. Will I watch this again? Never in my life. Ever. Yeah. Ever will I watch this again. This movie was just so boring.
Yeah, not great.
Not great. I think that's it.
I think we did it. Look at us.
I think
I'm
we
proud
did.
of us.
Look at us. We're tired. We need to go to bed.
I know. Watch. I'm going to take a shower and spend the next 3 hours staring at fucking TikTok. Absolute fool. Instead, I'm like obviously tired and I should literally get in bed and sleep. But I'm gonna be like, what then? TikTok, and it's gonna be like 12:30. I'm gonna be like, why do I do this? Why do I do this? For what? For what reason? I'm gonna giggle at like one of them. Oh my god.
Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Please don't forget to rate and review us on iTunes if you have not already. That really helps us with visibility, and it's just one of the greatest gifts that you can give us. Aside from our Patreon, which if you would like to become a patron, you can do so at patreon.com/NOTstalgia. There's a link in the show notes because we actually do those now, which we're very proud of. You can follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, all of the places. Artwork and music by Eric Lefebvre, editing by Danny Barkley. And thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Jess.
Yeah, thank you. This is fun.
This is fun. A joy. A treat, even.
A treat.
A little delight. A little moment.
And remember, stay cute.
And stay critical.
Bye.
Bye. Goodbye. This podcast has been brought to you by the NOTstalgia Network.
Visit thenotStalgiaNetwork.com for more.
Hey everybody, I'm Eric.
I'm Shelby.
I'm Jake.
And we are the band Lousy Advice from the Lousy Advice Podcast.
Come listen as we draft artist and genre-centric best of lists.
With the help of our closest friends.
These lists are canon.
And there's not a goddamn thing you can do about it.
From Misfits to Cher.
Green Day to Gaga.
Or Pup to Paramore.
Listen to the Lousy Advice Podcast now, or else.
Stream us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the NOTstalgia Network, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And don't forget that we are the band Lousy Advice, and this is our podcast, the Lousy Advice Podcast.
The Lousy Advice Podcast?
The Lousy Advice Podcast. Podcast.